In this video, we're going to assemble the Lily58 Pro split ergonomic keyboard. Now, when you get the Lily58 Pro, it's going to be a double-sided board. What that means is it can be used either left or right side. So when you get it, what you'll want to do is take both of the boards and lay them out, because you don't want to put the components on the wrong side. So right now, what I encourage you to do, if you're following along with me, take your boards, lay them out like this, and don't flip them over, because we're going to do our bottom components first, and then we'll flip the board over to do our top components. So our bottom components are going to be our switch hot sockets, which are these little guys. Now, if you bought your keyboard from turkeyboards.com, then the only option we have is the chalk low profile. If you've got the MX from somewhere else, or if you got this from someone else that has the MX sockets, you'll have a different socket type looking like this. It'll actually look more like an L. And these switches are set up for both types. So the top of the switch location, where you see these top pads with these little extra tabs on the outside, that is for the MX hot swap sockets. These sockets go on the bottom of the switch profile. So we'll take these, if I can grab it here, and we'll install them here at the bottom locations of each of the switches. What we're also going to do is our diodes. You'll see these little square pads here. These are all our diode locations. And we'll walk through step by step on installing these two components. It's fairly easy. I recommend, before getting started, make sure you have all your components out and ready. Also, make sure you have a good soldering iron with a nice fine tip. That's what I recommend, because I have the best success with. Also, make sure you have I'm using a flux pen here, but any type of flux is good. I also have a rosin core solder that I use, but the flux is still good for those smaller pads if there's not enough flux in the solder. So our diodes, I'll get this little tray out. I keep my diodes all together. The diodes are these surface mount diodes. They're itty bitty things. And what I want to show you here is how to place your diodes. So we just got done talking about our switch. Now our diodes go in this little spot here. And I'm going to zoom in on the camera so you can see this. You'll notice here on this, down here, that's where your socket, a hot swap socket goes for your switch. So we'll install that in that spot. Now this location here with the line and the arrow, this is where the diode goes. And you'll notice on the diodes, they have these little lines and it says T4 on them. The lines go on the same side as the line here. So in this case, right now, this diode is pointed in the wrong direction. So we'd want to flip this around and in order to put it in the right spot. So the way we solder these in is what I do is I go through and I solder one side of the pad for each of the diodes, as well as one side of the pad for each of the hot swap sockets. And then we'll solder those in. So let's do that here in this example while we're zoomed in so you can see what I'm doing. So here we take a little bit of solder, we heat up the pad, and we go ahead and just put a little bit of solder on there. It doesn't take much at all. Then in order to install our socket, we put our socket in that spot. We heat our pad. And now our socket is soldered into place on one side. Now we do the same thing for the diode. Only on the diodes, I usually take my pen, my flux pen, and I put a little bit of flux there just to make sure it flows well into that spot. We'll put a little bit of flux there, or solder rather. Now what we do is we take our diode, and as you can see, we line it up here and we just heat this pad up and let our diode rest right in it. And it's soldered in. It's a little crooked. These things are tiny, so we want to make sure that we got it straight. There we go. And now we'll want to put a little bit of solder on the back end to complete it. So to do that, let me move this so you can see it. I'm turning this so I can get to the back end easily. We'll put a little solder back here on the diode. And now we'll put a little bit of solder on this other pad for our switch socket. And there we go. Now we have one switch completed, which is our diode hot swap socket. So now I'm going to do the rest of these, and then we'll come right back. Okay, so now you notice we've got all of our diodes and our switch sockets installed in our Lily58 Pro. So now what we're going to do is we're done with the back side. So let's flip our boards over and we'll work on the top side. Now the first thing that I like to do when it comes to these is up in this upper area, this is where we're going to work in. This is to solder in our microprocessor sockets, our OLED, if we've got one of those, reset switch, and TRS connection. What I like to do though is these pads you'll notice here are here for the OLEDs. And the reason this is because the board's reversible. So when the board, just remember this. Whether you have an OLED or not, I recommend you do this next step, and that is bridging these solder connections. What this does is it allows us to add, whether you have an OLED now or not, doesn't matter, because later on, if you ever want to add a screen to your keyboard, you're going to need these bridges soldered, and it's easier just to go ahead and do it now than try and add it later on with everything soldered in. So let's go ahead and bridge these connections over. You just take a little bit of solder and dab it on. Let the solder bridge. And I always put a little bit of flux on there to help the solder flow a little better and stuff. It doesn't take a whole lot to bridge them, just a little bit. And see, my flux already kind of dried some, so I need to add a little more. And if one doesn't look that good, you can always just kind of take it and scrape it off. Sometimes you got to do that, but that actually looks pretty good. So now let's do the other side. We'll get our marker going here. You'll just want to make sure that the solder is on both sides of the pad. That way it's making a good connection. If it balls up on you like that, then I usually just kind of take it and get rid of that ball and just redo it. There we go. So now you'll see that we've got these joints soldered nice and good, and we're making good contacts. Now let's move on to our TRS connections. So I've got these right here. This is what these look like. And we'll go ahead and do our reset switches at the same time. So let's grab those. These are fairly simple to do. So your reset switches go here where it says reset, and then your TRS connections go up here. Now again, the reason for this is it's double-sided. It's only going to go in one way, because if you look at the connection, there's only connections on one side. So like for the left side, you're going to see how the connections plug in to the right there. And it's also going to be on the right-hand side on the right as well. The rightmost connections. Our reset switches are, doesn't matter which way you put them in, just put them in. They push right through and they'll hold themselves there pretty well. Now what you can do here if you want is you can take a little piece of tape and hold these. I usually just kind of flip them over and just hold it into place. These go in pretty easily. And what I do is, just like we did on our back side components, is I'll put a little solder on one pin just to make sure it's held good. I'll do that on both sides. And then I put some solder on one pin for the reset switch. That's just to make sure. So like, see how this is kind of lopsided. So I'll heat that pin up a little bit. That lets me get it pushed in, and so it's nice and flush. That way we don't have stuff sticking up too far. I don't know about you, but I like my boards nice and flush and clean looking best I can. Yeah, it's just slightly. There we go. So now that that's done, let's go ahead and solder the rest of these pins. There we go. Now our TRS jacks and our reset switches are in place. Pretty easy. Next, what I like to do is my sockets. Now, if you order it from us, you've got a couple different options. If you get it from turkeyboards.com, that is. But what I'm going to do is I primarily enjoy using these because these are low profile and they're pretty inexpensive. They're quite cost effective. And you'll notice here, there's two rows, but one row has a square going around it. So that marks which row you should plug these into. So in this case, it's going to be this row here on the side. And we'll go ahead and do both of these. Like so. There we go. Now, gently lay that down. Thankfully, these friction hold pretty well. You'll want to do the same thing on this side where you're putting them in where the silk screen shows it is outlined. And once that's in, we'll flip those over and do the same with it. Just like with all my connections. And you'll notice too on the flip side, this is the side with the line running through it, whereas the other side has the box. So that's another way to know from the bottom that you've got them in the right spot. Box always is on top, line is always on bottom. So we'll just to double check ourselves, I highly encourage you, we want to solder once. We'll just do a single pin on each of these. And once we do that, then we'll flip it over. We'll make sure that these are still nice and flush and in the right position. Because right now, if you did make any mistakes, it'd be real easy to swap these out. Everything looks perfect. So if you have any problems, again, a little piece of tape, masking tape, blue tape on the top side to hold the component in. There's nothing wrong with that. Makes it easy. So let me just go ahead and solder the rest of these pins on. There we go. Now we have our sockets in. So our top components are pretty much done unless you got an OLED. Now, if you got the OLED, that's fairly simple to do. We just grab our connector. What I typically do is I'll use these and then I'll use the round pins for the OLED because that is spaced like perfectly. And we'll just put those in there. Keep in mind, we already soldered our jumpers, so we're good there. So now again, we'll want to flip this over and we'll want to solder this end. Now this one can be a little pickier. You might want to do like a little piece of tape or something, but I'm ignorant and I usually just set it down and call it good. Again, do one connection. And we'll do the same with this one. Again, you don't have to do it the way I'm doing it. I'm just stubborn cuss. Tape is easier. But I just don't want to get my tape out. There we go. Now what you'll want to do once you get that one pin in, we just make sure that's nice and straight. That way we don't have it crooked. There we go. Do the same thing on this side. Dang, that one's pretty straight. There we go. All right. And we get the rest of these pins. There we go. All right. Now we have all of our components soldered in. We have no other components to solder except for our OLEDs, if we're getting those, and our processors. Now, the easiest way to do the processors, I've already got a couple that are soldered here, so I'm going to use those as examples, but I usually take the headers here, and I'll go ahead and put them in the socket. And then once I have them in, I'll take my processor, my microprocessor, and I'll put it in. Now the reason I want to show you this is because orientation on these matter. So on the Lily58, you want to mount this upside down. That way you see the C-Picro or whatever logo of whatever microprocessor you're putting in here. The other thing is this first pin is empty. So you'll notice here, this pin is empty. Get my needle nose through there real easy. And then it's flush with the back here of the connector. So that's how you know there's a pin here and there's a pin here on pin 2. The topmost, frontmost pins, if you have those on your processor, you do not want to solder those connections. So once you have that in, you can just solder it in. I've already got set pre-soldered here. Usually I go ahead and solder it while it's on the board. And then once you solder it in, it's fairly easy to set in there. You see how nice and low profile that is. Next, we do our screens. That's fairly easy. We just simply take our pins. You'll see the long side and a short side on these. The longer side, that's what you want to put face down into the connector. And then we place our screen on top. And usually what I recommend too with this is you'll get a little piece of tape, and then you can use that sticky tape to keep your screen from moving around. Otherwise it's going to flop some. Once you have your screen and your processors installed, everything comes pre-flashed when you order it from Turkey Boards, so you don't have to worry about flashing it. You just go to Vile's website, which the instructions are included with your order, and you can configure it. But the last couple things we want to do is we want to put this in its case. We want to put the top plate on, and then your switches are fairly simple to do. These are all just press fit. We take our switches, plug them right into our hot swap sockets. You'll see how the bottom has the socket. We just push that right on in. It's in there. And then we take whatever keycap set we ordered, whatever set we've got, and we install those on top. And that's pretty much it. It's very, very simple to build this keyboard, as you can tell. I hope you enjoyed this video and going through this with me. And I hope you enjoy your Lily58 Pro as much as we do. It's a good, fun keyboard to work with and very comfortable one. It's one of the, personally, I find it's one of the more comfortable ones to utilize. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.